All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Adapters Advantage podcast. My name is Dennis Oljai, Vice President of Marketing at Allego. And I'm so excited to be joined today by Neil Patwardhan, Senior Vice President of Sales at Accenture. Neil, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we're going to be talking today about navigating cultural differences in B2B sales. And before we get to the topic at hand, I think it'll be really helpful for folks to really get a sense for how you arrived at the role that you are at today.
My career trajectory is highly non-linear. And for me, it's always been about risk. That's been kind of the cornerstone of my career. I've been in corporate for many years with the likes of Dell and Dun & Bradstreet and LG. I've been in startup world with three startups, and then back into large corporate with Accenture. So, but throughout all those roles and sort of the twists and turns, every one of them carried a risk, a very high potential upside, but not a clear route to get there. A mentor of mine once told me, and she accurately assessed this for me, is I do my best work in the first 18 months of the role. And post 18 months, if it's highly stabilized, I will start to get bored. So I think kind of playing that back throughout my career, even taking the risk and moving to Asia Pacific, where there's significant growth. It's not a region where I've traditionally operated in, so I didn't have sort of the relationships, the cultural understanding, which we'll get to, I'm sure, as part of this talk. It has all been exciting and upside.
I'm just so curious about what were some of your maybe initial observations on some of the cultural differences and sort of how do people approach sort of complex B2B sales in Singapore?
Coming to Asia, very quickly you realize how the American way of working is perceived. Taking a step back and really just listening and reading the room and understanding that cultural significance and working through a conversation, a pitch, a deal has helped shape my mentality a lot more than me just coming in and saying, listen, this is how we're going to do it. The folks that I've seen be successful, kind of moving from the US to Asia, have basically tempered, quote unquote, their Americanness in some ways, at least in the sales process, to really build a repertoire of insights first, right, on how to behave in a particular culture, and then come in as a subject matter expert and helping kind of boost that conversation. So it's a more of a listen and adapt versus this is what it is.
As we relate that back to the world of, enablement, and typically, enablement leaders are working together with their counterparts to really arm their teams on skills and knowledge and practice, ahead of going into these live conversations. But again, if you've got, sellers that are distributed across these key geographies, and you've got, team members that are selling into different geographies that they're in, one of the key components to understand from your perspective is really that, cultural difference, right? So sometimes taking that playbook that worked in market A, right, whether let's call it the UK market or the US market, and applying that direct same playbook in market C is not necessarily, equivalent in terms of return, right? And we need to understand those complexities. We need to arm our coaches with guidance for their teams and reps to kind of manage those complexities. And I'm curious sort of how you approach that for your team, right? So what were some of the things that you did to kind of arm your team, or maybe even arm yourself, right, as sort of someone new in that market?
There's really two levels of trust you've got to build, right? One is with the client or the customer, right? And then the one is with your team that's servicing the client or customer, right? And how you go about building it is different in every country in Asia. It really is. Asia is always hungry to learn new things, right? They want to understand how folks in other countries and markets are doing it, but they also want to localize it. And if it's not localized well, more than likely it's going to fall on deaf ears and just becomes another asset that sits in a dam somewhere that will not get utilized to its full extent. Building that trust internally takes a lot of time. So just an example around how do you build those two levels of trust? You've got to win the first one, which is your internal teams, so that they are comfortable enough putting you in front of their customers, so that you could help them boost their upside, right? So it's kind of a sequence. Look, at the end of the day, complex B2B sales, right? It's never about the sale. It's about the journey, and it takes time, right? It takes time to mature. And you may have multiple stakeholders that you will need to build that credibility and trust with. Um, the sale will happen if there is that enough of that trust and credibility and time spent, where the client clearly understands that whatever you're offering is the best solution for them. Again, it's all about that individual trust, because the deals will happen.
I do want to dig into sort of maybe some of the approaches that you take at Accenture on maybe building that competency, right? Around building rapport and trust and relationships.
We do have some core curriculum that we walk a majority of our sellers through, on how to build kind of the rapport, and how do you do your research before you talk to a buyer. How do you even follow the rabbit hole to the right buyer, right? So if you had to jump through multiple levels, but then also, not a pure salesy. We're a growth engine, right? And that's one thing that I try to be clear from the onset with all of my customers that I meet for the first time. Look, if you're looking for someone to give you a staff augmentation and a price to the bottom, I'm not that, right? And that's a very near term view. I'm like, but if you want to truly unlock 5, 10, 15x growth over the next 5 years, let me help you out, right? I mean, and we can get deeper into the mechanics of what that would look like. I think credentialing yourself fairly quickly, I think, is important. But you also have to be bold enough to say no. Stand your ground, right? Sometimes where the conversation leads to may not be ideal for either party. And you have to be willing to walk away from the table, which is really hard in sales, because you're trying to book every deal. But at the end, on the flip side of this, right, is even depending on whatever solution you sold, right, people still have to deliver it. And if it's not scoped out correctly, then it's going to be a major CSAT issue down the line, which will prevent future sales happening in that client or account.
What are some of the changes that you're implementing in your team, particularly, in terms of accounting for these cultural differences and navigating this complexity within your team? Like, what do you think are some of the future trends, and sort of how are you really adapting your team to succeed and with this sort of in mind?
There's never going to be a substitute for face-to-face building and trust. So again, how do you spend more time with your customers and your clients to really live a day in their shoes, right? And if that means you need to travel, or if that means you need to spend time with them in the beginning, just without even having a clear understanding of what solutions we might bring to a table. And every new seller that comes to my business, right, I'm like, at the end of the day, you need to start outside in. Stay with your client. Understand what is happening in. You should be one of their employees, right? And if you have an innate understanding of what's happening and what they care about and where they want to go, then we can work our way backwards into the type of solutions that we can provide for them. Your first 3 months, you should be spending more time with the clients than anything else, and less time on your own products and services, because the positioning that will change depending on what your clients want.
Well, thank you so much, Neil, for all your great advice and tips on navigating cultural differences to be successful in sales. It was a pleasure to have you in the program, and hope to have you again as a repeat guest. Thanks for everything that you shared with our audience today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.